It means God has, in humility, surrendered the control to his creation.
How can a good, loving, all-knowing God, how can he allow evil?
Father Antonius, welcome to Parable Podcast. How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you. It is a pleasure to be with you, gents.
That's good. Chris, you doing all right?
I'm doing really well. Thank you so much.
Okay, that's good. You reckon you'll ever not be doing all right?
Every day is a good day.
Okay.
Yeah, so
God bless. Bless the Lord. Okay, awesome. So today we've got a pretty heavy topic, I'd say. Problem. Yeah.
We'll try and make it as light as possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no such thing as a heavy topic, I think.
No?
No, I don't think so. No,
There's some pretty heavy topics.
Nah.
But yeah, no. So today we're talking about the problem of evil and suffering. And we've got Father Antonius Kaldas, who, Chris, how do you know Father?
I met him on the street.
Oh, really?
No, he's a teacher. Well, do you have a PhD?
I do.
On what?
In philosophy.
Yeah. So you're a doctor.
Yeah.
So we did a unit on apologetics for St. Cyril's.
Yeah.
And I think this was week 5, the problem for theists.
Yes.
Yeah. And I found it very interesting, the problem of suffering and how can a good and loving God allow evil in the world. And lots of people will struggle with this idea, like because there's evil, because I'm suffering, that means God doesn't exist. So I think it's a very nice topic to talk about. And the way you explained it and the sources you had was very good. So yeah.
Awesome. Just before we get into that, we had Debbie Armanios, who you're fond of, and Abhinav Salama, who are from Exodus, on our previous episode, and they left you some questions at the end of the episode.
Oh, isn't that nice of them?
Yes, it is. They're quite good questions.
They said you're in the board of Exodus.
I've actually just left, but yeah. I'm getting too old for those sorts of things.
Fair. No, so we'll get you to... It will watch the whole thing and then.
Oh, okay. They recorded them.
Yes,
right.
yes. This is from the last episode. So here you go.
Oh, here we go.
Say it.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Okay. So, Father Antonius, where are you hoping the education, the spiritual education of our children, where's it going for the future? Where do you hope it to be for our children in the future?
You want to just be on the podcast and ask him the questions? That's so good.
Did it make sense?
Awesome. Yeah. Definitely did. Yeah.
Abba, question from you.
How did you raise such wonderful children?
Oh, that's better than
How do you raise wonderful children?
Up to you.
I love Sam.
Yeah. Okay. I'll keep that
and
in.
Bethany.
And Bethany, yes.
Awesome.
Oh, dear. And I can't get them back, can I? Because they've already done it.
They've done it, yeah. Unfortunately. We'll start with Abba's question.
Okay, yeah. Look, basically, I don't think I did raise my kids. I think
Cop-out answer.
any good that they ended up with is probably despite what we did rather than because of what we did. And I think anyone who has children will probably understand that that is a very realistic answer. You're not given a manual when you have kids. And particularly the first one, you make all your mistakes with them. And we certainly made quite a lot. But look, I think speaking more generally, not about my own kids, but more generally, I think if people are actually quite genuine in their faith and, just do it because it makes sense and because they genuinely believe in it and so on, I think that's something that kids kind of see and helps them to absorb it and to follow it. I think problems happen when people, I don't know, are doing it for show or whatever reasons, and then kids can become sort of quite cynical.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think, you definitely like reenact the things that you see in your parents. So I feel like you're saying that you didn't do much, but I'm sure that as your children were growing up, they would have emulated things that you've done. Do you actually notice that in your kids, that they do specific things that you do, certain
I think,
quirks?
yeah, all kids have.
Yeah.
I mean, poor Bethany inherited my terrible dad jokes and sense of humor. Poor thing. Samuel obviously is into philosophy and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But their mum also, I think, had probably a much bigger influence on them, particularly as they were growing up. And I was out of the house a lot, probably way more than I should have been. And I apologize for that, kids, if you're watching.
With the knowledge you have now, if you go back in time, would you change anything?
Yeah, I think I would have spent more time with them than I did. Unfortunately, you can't go back though. Yeah. Apart from that, look, I mean, there are so many things that if I knew what I know now, I could go back and do it back then, but that's not how life works. You have to learn on the job.
Yeah. Was social media and things like that a big problem when your children were growing up?
No, they weren't. We were fortunate enough for them to be old enough to just miss out on that. Yeah. So my youngest, who's Bethany, she would have been, 2007 was the first iPhone.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. And she would have been about 9 at that stage. Okay. And by a remarkable gift from heaven, she didn't want a smartphone until she was a teenager. She literally did not want it. Yeah. And so she was never really that into, even today, she's not really into social media and stuff like that. So thankfully, no, we didn't really have to struggle with that. And they're actually the ones who teach me. They tell me now, like, Dad, don't do this on social media, and this is how this works, and I take my instructions from them.
Good.
I know Bethany read a book. I don't know how many books she read, but she writes books.
Yeah.
I don't know if Sam does too.
Yeah.
So what do you think inspired them to write books and become philosophical?
Well, in Samuel's case, the book that he's written is actually his PhD thesis that he did on a very obscure little corner of philosophy, a group called the Cambridge Platonists.
Chris, do you want to explain to us what that is?
I have no clue.
Look, they're actually really interesting people, and I've read his book. Actually, I think I've read it a few times because I read like drafts of it and stuff along the way. But they lived in the 1600s, I think, if I've got that correct, maybe into the 1700s. At a time when Protestants in Europe, a lot of them were Calvinists. So they're the guys who say God has created some people to be thrown right into hell, and no matter what they do, they're going to go to hell. And some people are created for heaven, and no matter what they do, they're going to go to heaven. And they have all these sort of things that we as Orthodox would sort of say, no, that's not right. And these guys who were Protestant, but they disagreed with all of that kind of stuff. And they had these fascinating discussions back and forth and gave sermons and lectures and wrote letters to each other and wrote books and stuff. And a lot of what they say really kind of resonates, I think, with a lot of Orthodox thinking, which is just fascinating. And it's probably because they read a lot of ancient texts. They're called the Cambridge Platonists because they were based in Cambridge University, and they read a lot of Plato, the Greek philosopher, who was probably the biggest philosophical influence or single one on the Church Fathers. Wow. So they've sort of shared the worldview of the Church Fathers in a lot of ways. So
Calvinism, and that's the group that, if you're in hell, like you were born, you're going to hell.
Yeah.
You can't change that. So that's predestination.
Predestination, yeah.
And I think that's a massive problem with God and suffering.
Absolutely,
because you take away the free will part.
Yeah.
Which we'll probably talk about.
Yeah.
In the future.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
In the near future. In like 10 minutes.
Yeah, put the timer on. Just Debbie's, before that, Debbie's question. Yeah, so Debbie's question was...
the future of education. Look, I feel that, and okay, I'm probably going to get lots of people angry now with what I'm going to say. But look, the Sunday school model has served the church really well for the last 100 years. there's no doubt, I don't think anyone could say that it has not been wildly successful. But I also think it's approaching its use-by date because the world has changed and kids have changed. And it is simply no longer the expected thing for a child to sit in a room and listen for 45 minutes or an hour to someone talking, right? I mean, I don't think in schools that even happens, right? Everything is activities and what do they call all this stuff that my wife's a teacher, so she tells me about stuff and it just goes whoosh way over my head. Evidence-based strategies and differentiation and all this sort of stuff. And most Sunday school teachers are not trained educators. And it's very hard to do that, right? To do it well. I feel what really needs to happen is we need to focus on the thing that Sunday school managed to do really well in the past, but is increasingly finding it hard. And that is the building of relationships. A kind of, I suppose we would call it discipleship in the church. Some years ago, my wife and I did a sort of a survey of disconnected people from the church. We gathered sort of focus groups and we sat them down and we said, look, we're not here to judge you. We're not here to pressure you to come back to church. We are just here to listen. We just want to understand your experience. Why did you disconnect from church? And we learned a lot from that. And one of the things that kept coming back over and over was this. I don't remember a single thing they told me in Sunday school, right? It over and over. But a lot of them said, the one thing I do remember was that one Sunday school servant who that year, he paid attention to us and he loved us and he made us feel that we were important to him. And that I will always carry in my heart and I will never forget that. And I think if you look either at the apostles when they evangelized, or if you look at the culture of the monks and the nuns in the desert, it's discipleship, right? It's personal relationship. And Sunday school was good at doing that when kids were lovely and pleasant and obedient and would sit down and be still for 45 minutes, right? It's not happening now, and it's really, really hard. How can we come up with a model that allows that kind of discipleship to happen? And I don't know the answer to that, but I'm glad to say that there are people who are starting to think about it and work on it. And I hope that we will see some fruits coming out of that.
Yeah. It's actually, it's a great point. I recently started like serving Sunday school this year. And in a chat with Abuna, I think might have been during confession, he was telling me like how Sunday school been, how are your kids and all these things. Anyway, he quickly found out that I was very not on top of my Sunday school class. And he knew that I was doing service at the podcast and other things with the youth and whatnot. And he was like more or less telling me that like Sunday school, that's like your bread and butter. Like those kids look up to you. They see you in the mass. If you're not there on time, they wonder why you're not at mass and coming to class late or sometimes missing out on class. Like they look up to you in everything that you do. And he gave me great advice. He was like you should be standing next to them in the mass. You should be with them at all times. And it's not so much about the lesson, but it's about the relationship that you build. And it's so true. Like you'll always remember, I'm sure you, Chris, probably remember stories of your Sunday school teachers when they did that goofy thing, or like when they accidentally like threw you in the pool and like broke your leg or something crazy. But these are the stories that we remember, and these are the relationships that we build. And it's so true. Like I've done a few visitations. I actually have one tomorrow, funnily that you say that. And I think that you can even tell that they're more attentive in class. They're more responding in class when they know that you genuinely care about them and that you actually want what's best for them and just want to have fun with them. It's not all about like, I have this content to get through and here it is.
I think the relationship is far more important than the content. Yeah. And if you get the relationship, the content will follow because they'll be interested in themselves and they'll get it.
Yeah, for sure. All right, the problem of suffering and evil.
Yes.
Before that as well, you talked a bit about Calvinism, and let's try to. I want to talk about Protestant first for a bit, then Calvinism, and then we'll talk about the problem of suffering, and then you add in your questions too.
Yeah, whatever.
You had a question about Calvinism as well.
Yeah.
So I was actually talking to someone yesterday. I was like, I'm going to do a podcast tomorrow. I was like, oh, you do a podcast? I was like, oh, you don't know? Come on. Anyways, no, I'm just kidding. So I said, oh yeah, it's Abuna Antonius. And is that how you pronounce it? No?
Oh, anything.
No,
will do.
say it so I can.
Yeah, Antonius. Yeah.
Antonius. Yeah. Okay. And he's like, oh yeah, he wrote a paper on speaking about on tongues and the Holy Spirit and all this stuff. And 2 days ago, actually, I was speaking to my friend who used to be in a Pentecostal church, and he joined the Coptic church. He was on a Sunday. We're talking about it. I talked to because in his church people speak in tongues, so I don't want to dismiss it and say it's fake. And so I asked him, I was like, how genuine is it? You know, I don't know. And so I want to show you.
So what did he say? Yeah,
he said that. Well. The question was, are they faking it? What is it? I don't want to dismiss it. And he just said, there's a bunch of people. He said, I don't know, but there's a bunch of people who are losers who do it. Oh. And then they ruin it for everyone else. So it's like, if this guy's doing it, it's for sure fake. Yeah. That's what he said.
Oh dear.
Actually, on that, there's we have a person who does talks at our church often, and he was a Protestant pastor actually at a Pentecostal church, and he's recently converted to Orthodoxy in the last few years. Great speaker, and he's gone through all these things. And I had a very, very brief conversation, but briefly he touched on it's in the Bible and it's something that's happened. However, the method by which these Pentecostal churches go about it, he's very hesitant to believe that it's likely the way that you receive the power of speaking in tongues. Yeah, it's more so through humility and all of these things.
Yeah.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, look, I'm okay. So one, I should say, nothing I'm going to say should in any way be taken as some kind of criticism of Pentecostals or, Protestantism or anything, but it is a really interesting phenomenon. So one thing I found out was there's a difference between what they call glossolalia and xenolalia. So basically, xenolalia is what happens in the book of Acts when the Holy Spirit comes down on the apostles at Pentecost, and they speak and everyone hears them speaking in their own language, right? So they're speaking languages they never learned, but people are understanding what they're saying because they're speaking Egyptian or whatever, Italian or Latin or whatever it might be. Then there's glossolalia, and glossolalia is sort of nonsense syllables, right? It sounds like speech, but nobody understands and nobody, recognizes the words that are being said. The fascinating thing is that glossolalia, the nonsense one, is found in many different cultures and many different religions, right? And it seems to me to be something that is an aspect of how our brains work. And there are lots of reasons to think that. For example, people did a study in America and they found that Pentecostals who, for example, live on the East Coast will speak, and there'll be certain syllables that are said more frequently, right, than others. If they move to the West Coast, there are other different syllables that are said more frequently, and the longer they live on the West Coast, gradually their accent, right, changes, and they start, because they're hearing it, and they start speaking now with that one, right? Now, that little detail tells you it's very likely to be, I actually think of it like, the Coptic deacon who loves the alhan, right? And they love learning these beautiful long tunes, and they understand exactly zero Coptic language, right? And yet they will sing this hymn and they are in an ecstasy. They are in heaven, even though they have no idea what they're saying. I think that's what's going on. It's something very similar to that. They're just making this beautiful sound. It is a spiritual experience. I'm sure there are people who fake it, but I think a lot of them are very genuine. They're having a genuine, emotionally moving experience. But is that the same thing as a gift of the Holy Spirit? Well, it's certainly not what happened at Pentecost. That was a very different thing. And you don't find that, the xenolalia, you don't find that anywhere else. It happens at Pentecost. It's not in other cultures and religions. Because think about it. How could someone suddenly start talking a language they don't know? And it's actually the real language, right? But St. Paul in 1 Corinthians, I think 14, he actually sort of discourages the Corinthians because what they were doing was not xenolalia. It wasn't what happened at Pentecost. He says to them, I'd rather you speak 5 words with understanding than 10,000 words without understanding. What they were doing was not understandable languages. It was this glossolalia. And clearly, St. Paul didn't say, stop it, you horrible heretics, right? Which he could have done, because pagans did that before the Christians. He could have said to them, what you're doing is a pagan practice, stop it. But he actually didn't do that because I'm sure he saw that people were spiritually engaged. Like I said, we don't say to the deacon, stop it, you horrible heretic, just because he doesn't. I mean, we tell him, please understand what you're saying. As St. Paul said, I'd rather, pray with the mind as well as with the tongue. But he didn't sort of tell them stop it altogether. So that would be my sort of approach to that. I would say, God bless you. If that's a way that you can pray and it makes you feel close to God, that's fine. But if you want to convince me that this is a gift of the Holy Spirit, I'm a bit skeptical about that.
I have a bit of a skeptical mind as well. So when you're saying that in terms of it's in the mind. So if you're Pentecostal and you hear all these syllables, you say that. Would you say sometimes the same for apparitions?
Oh, that's another interesting question. You're bringing out my skepticism here, okay? So let me say, miracles, apparitions, there is no doubt that they occur. I just think that the majority of claims just aren't the real thing.
Yeah.
Fake news.
I think one claim that I know of that's very consistent, everyone says, is the apparition of St. Mary in Egypt.
Yes,
which
and
I don't know
Zaytun.
much about at all.
Yeah.
What are the claims? How do we know it's true?
Well, there's a book that was written about 40 years ago by a couple of Americans who were like scientists, I think engineer and a scientist or something, husband and wife, and an Egyptian guy. Our Lady of Light or something, I can't remember the exact title of it, where they actually did a scientific evaluation of all the evidence that was available at that time. And they built a pretty good case. There's another book that only came out about 2 years ago, or maybe 1 year ago, by Trevor Dumsday, who is an Eastern Orthodox scholar. And he does a sort of a modern take on it, not only from a scientific point of view, but also from a theological and, ecclesial church side and all that sort of stuff. And again, he comes, like the picture that he paints, the evidence that he presents is incredibly convincing. When you have thousands of people looking and seeing her at the same time, there really is no plausible explanation other than, well, look, there are two sort of plausible ones, right? One is it actually is St. Mary and it actually is a miracle. The other one is some very clever and nasty aliens are playing a trick on us using a technology far beyond our understanding. And I say they're both plausible, but I think you'll see one of them is maybe a bit less plausible than the other.
One thing that doesn't make sense, actually, I read a book and I know this person personally and I know their grandchildren. He was Muslim. He was sick. He had this journey of Christianity. He met someone who was Christian and he was Muslim. He was in the hospital. He had some serious condition and St. Mary appeared and then he got healed.
Right.
He appeared when it was
during Zaytun.
During Zaytun.
Right.
And then he became Christian. He left his country. He came to Australia. I know his grandchildren. They're my friend. They come to our church. I don't know if you know him. It's called the book not. Is called When I Saw the Light.
Right.
Anyways, so this is someone where they experienced it. They got healed. They were Muslim and now they're Christian.
Yeah.
And something like that. I'm very skeptical. But when I see someone personally who's experienced it,
Yeah.
that's a whole nother level.
Yeah. Look, can I tell you a similar experience? My mum had the blessing of being in Jerusalem many years ago during the coming of the light at Easter. And you can see videos of this on YouTube, actually. And she told me, like, you buy these bunches of 33 candles and you light them from the light that comes from the tomb, it spreads. And she saw people putting their hands in the 33 flaming candles. And she thought, that can't be right. So she sort of held it up, and then gradually brought it down. And she said, I brought it down until my hands were right in the flames. And it didn't feel hot. Now, I don't know, how do you explain that? But again, like, I know my mum, and I know she would never make something like that up. So, yeah, I think, as I say, right, there are real miracles. There is no doubt about it. But a lot of the claims we don't have that kind of evidence to support it, I suppose. And I think we should be skeptical about that, because otherwise we give miracles a bad name.
Yeah.
Not everything's a miracle.
Yeah. Or everything is a miracle, but that's another story.
Yeah. All right, so we're going to Calvinism?
Yeah, I think that's your question.
Yeah, so I actually grew up in a Protestant church as well. I've said this probably every podcast at this point.
I never asked, actually, what Protestant branch was it?
Presbyterian.
Okay, so that's like...
It's just...
that's okay. Like, it's...
That's okay. Yeah, I mean, I actually don't know too much about specifics. It's run by a council. There's no priests. It's like a council of like elders. That's like who kind of make the decisions. It's not really high Protestant from my knowledge. You probably know more than me, but but Calvinism's a big thing in our church. So in my family's church. So, which is interesting because it is a sort of doctrine that people hold by, but there's also a lot of people in my church, if I was to speak to my mum, who wouldn't hold to that. She firmly believes in free will. She'll tell anyone about that. But which is interesting because it's like you can kind of have your own interpretation, which is quite weird. But yeah, Calvinism is kind of based on the idea that God is all powerful and all in control, and he kind of chooses our paths before we even know it. And there's obviously lots of, I think in Romans 9, it talks about predestination, and they'll reference verses like God hardening Pharaoh's heart in terms of, so he was, born to fill out this sort of course of his life and kind of destined to hell, which is a crazy thing to take. And it was something that I struggled with when I was younger. Actually, longer before I turned to Orthodoxy, there was something that was always in my head. Like, it just doesn't add up. And something specifically that we would sing in church, we'd sing, death, where is your sting? Hell, where is your victory? And then we'd proclaim that it's through Christ. But I always think to myself, I would be like, where's the victory when there's so many people who get destined to hell before they're even born? Yeah. So
what's the point?
So that was something that would go on in my head. And I know people that are very, very close to me in my family who kind of push away the faith because of that sort of very belief. So after that whole tangent, so Calvinism, sort of, where does it come from, and why do we believe in free will as Orthodox Christians?
Yeah, well, the answer to the second question is because that was the belief of all Christians for most of the history of Christianity.
Yes, exactly.
Calvinism obviously originates with John Calvin back in the 1500s, who was a younger contemporary of Martin Luther and felt that he hadn't taken things far enough and wanted to take things further. I think it's often also called the Reformed tradition, because he wanted to not just reform Catholicism, but reform the reformers in a sense.
Yes,
and he was a lawyer. John Calvin was a lawyer by trade. And that really comes across in a lot of his writings. He's the one who famously really emphasized the legalistic understanding of salvation and of the atonement, that sin is a crime against God, and, someone has to pay for it, someone has to be punished. So God well, this is what it amounts to. God punishes his own son, who actually has done nothing wrong himself, so that the people who did something wrong don't have to suffer their punishment. And if you think about it, that is actually the opposite of justice, isn't it? Justice means you do the crime, you do the time.
Yeah.
That is what justice means. And that's just not just, that the innocent should suffer and the guilty should get off, scot-free. Is it justice for someone to be thrown into hell when they had no choice in the matter? That's not justice. So look, I totally agree with your sentiments. And again, look, some of my best friends are Protestants and Calvinists. I'm not criticizing them as people. Often they're much better people morally than I am. I'm not saying that at all. But when you look at the teaching itself, I have to say honestly that if Calvinism was the only version of Christianity available, I don't think I could be a Christian, because it just wouldn't make sense to me. And I've often struggled with my conscience whether I'm not being unfair to Calvinists and Reformed theologians and so on. But this came up in a Bible study that we do at our parish a little while ago. So we invited a couple of Calvinist theologians from the various seminaries and theological colleges here. And we had just an open discussion with them. And we really tried to, that principle of charity, right? Try to listen to what the person's saying in the best possible way. We tried to do that as far as we could. And they did not back down. They insisted this is right. This is the correct theology. So I don't think I'm doing them a disservice. I think this really is what they believe. But as you said, within a community, you obviously have, people do have different understandings and different levels or types of belief about it.
It sounds very St. Augustine.
Yeah, look, I think that's where it gets traced to St. Augustine. And look, Thomas Aquinas also had some stuff like this. One of the horrible consequences of this theology is, and Aquinas actually says this, he says that the joy of those in heaven will be increased by the suffering of those in hell, because they're getting what they deserve. And that's sort of right. And therefore the people in heaven will rejoice at this. And then there's a guy whose name escapes me, Isaac Watts, who was a great hymn writer in the Calvinist tradition in the 1700s. And when you look at some of his hymns, one of them is, I don't remember the words exactly, but the essence of it is how those in heaven will rejoice as they see the sinners rolling in the flames, shouting and screaming in agony.
Oh my goodness.
I always think of like an Aussie barbecue, and they're standing there laughing and joking as they roast the meat,
Yeah, wow.
I would assume that people in heaven and God is very upset that people are in hell.
Yeah, and this is the more traditional sort of Christian view, that God, and I don't think it's scriptural. There are so many places in the Bible where God says, I don't want anyone to be lost. Why, in Ezekiel 33, why don't you turn, my people? I don't want you to be lost. And when Jesus comes along, right, and he says, he weeps for Jerusalem like like the mother hen trying to call her chicks. I've probably got that wrong. Please.
Like a brood, like a hen. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Like a, you know what?
I'll place it here.
Yeah.
The correct the correct quote, because we're
like a hen gathers her chicks under her wings.
Like a hen, that's the one. Like a hen gathers her chicks under her wings.
For some reason, brood. What's brood?
Yeah, because
isn't the word brood
hens brood over their chicks.
Maybe.
Yeah, well done.
Who knows, man?
I was lost.
Yeah,
I'm lost.
But yeah, that's exactly it. So I think, and this is going to tie into the problem of evil as well, right? Because God gave us free will in order that we could love intentionally, voluntarily. We could choose to love. And of course, if you have no choice in the matter, then it's like the difference between, having a relationship with a human being and having a relationship with ChatGPT, which apparently is becoming a thing nowadays.
I kind of do.
But I mean more than that. I saw an article in some newspaper site, about, is it healthy to have a romantic relationship with an AI?
Yeah.
So apparently, that's the thing.
Is that a question?
people
Of
are
course
doing.
it's not.
He just understands me.
But I mean, that's the feeling you'd
Yeah.
get, right? If the AI is clever enough, it will say all the right things. But would you accept that, right? There's a reason you're shaking your head. The AI is not a person. It has no choice in the matter. There's no experience that the AI is having. And that's the difference, right? God could have made a world where everybody loves him with every fiber of their being, like an artificial intelligence. But that would be a very different world to the world we live in, where we actually choose to love him.
On that point, how can a good, loving, all-knowing God, how can he allow evil?
Yep. And this is a question that's been asked all the way back to Greek philosophy over 2,000 years ago.
But we're going to figure it out today.
We'll fix it today.
We'll fix it. That's it.
Look, actually, I joke, but a guy called Alvin Plantinga, who, by the way, is of the Reformed tradition. He's a Christian philosopher. And surprisingly, he has come up with what's called the free will defense. Now, let me just take a step back for a minute. We can try and answer that question on a number of different levels. Okay, so one of them is the logical level. The way that you posed it is a logical question. We have a piece of data here. God is all good, all powerful. He can do whatever he wants. And we have another piece of data here. There is evil and suffering in the world. And the two pieces, it seems impossible to make them fit together, right? Because that shouldn't happen. Evil shouldn't happen. And the solution he came up with is this. If you put free will into the mix, is it better for God to create a world of artificial intelligences, right? Robots who do everything he commands? Is that a better world with no evil in it? Or is it better to create a world with beings who have free will and therefore must be capable of choosing to do evil, and that evil actually happens? Otherwise, it wouldn't be free will, right? If every time I chose to, shoot someone, there was some law of nature that stopped the bullet halfway, well, it's not really a moral choice anymore. Because there's no real consequences to my choices. So there had to be real consequences to our choices. And once you put that into the mix, it turns out that pretty much everyone agrees the world that has free will and evil is a much better world than the world that has no free will but no evil. And so that logical question, and I've just given obviously a terribly simplified version of it. Even my most complicated version would still be a terribly simplified version of, this guy's a genius, this Alvin Plantinga. When you read his books, they're heavy going. They're not easy to comprehend. But he's done something very unusual in the world of philosophy. He's answered a philosophical question so well that pretty much all philosophers agree he's solved it.
Wow.
Which never happens in philosophy, right? Yeah. They keep talking about things forever. But that's only one level, right? That's the, relatively easy one.
And he would have solved it because he's saying that free will, that's the best possible world we can live in.
Exactly.
Is to have free will.
Yeah.
Because if you stop free will, that's it. We're robots.
Yeah.
AI. Virtue is no longer praised.
There's no virtue. There's no morality. There's no love. Yeah. None of those things that we value, that we think make us human beings in the image of God, as a Christian would say.
Okay. If I put my Calvinist hat on.
Sure.
Is that not stopping God from being all controlling and all powerful if we can do things that are out of his sort of hand? Like if I can do something that he doesn't will and hasn't willed and hasn't predestined, am I not assuming the role of God? And doesn't that mean that God doesn't have a control over me?
Yes, it does. It means God has, in humility, surrendered the control to his creation, right? Which is an act of love. Because to us, that's the most crucial thing about the nature of God, is that he is love. So he creates beings who can truly love, just as he loves, or at least as a shadow of the way that he loves. Now, does that mean God has lost control of everything in the world? We would say no, because the pattern of the world is the pattern of Christ, crucifixion and resurrection. We do evil. We crucified him. He turns the evil into an even greater good. He rises from the dead. And that is the pattern of God's love for the world. So ultimately, his goodness is not defeated. Even our weaknesses, he manages to turn into even greater goods. And in that sense, he still has control of the whole thing.
Yeah.
What about now? So we've solved the issue of free will.
Well,
Solved.
Alvin did, but yeah.
So like suffering exists because if I get stabbed, I'm not going to be like, why God did you stab me?
Yeah.
It's not God's, it's this guy who stabbed me.
Yeah.
But let's say, for example, no one did anything. For example, let's say human condition, I form some sort of illness and I'm suffering for it.
Yeah.
What's the defense in, like, why does God allow that? Why does God allow people to suffer?
Yeah.
If you take free will out of the equation, why does God allow people to suffer?
Well, I don't have as good an answer for this one as the last one. We're waiting for another Alvin Plantinga to come along and,
his name's Father, and
do what he did. But I think mostly the way that we would understand it in the Orthodox tradition is that the human being cannot be taken as isolated from the rest of the world. So what a human being chooses to do affects, in a sense, the whole world. And we kind of see that today already on a large scale. I mean, if we build a city around a river and we throw all our rubbish in the river, nature suffers, right? The fish die, algal blooms come along, diseases come back and start to kill us. Right, so we are not isolated from the world. And in that sense, I think humanity as a whole, or I suppose one way to think of it is sin poisons our relationship with the rest of the world. So nature is neither morally good nor morally evil just in and of itself, right? It just goes along, follows the laws of nature, does what it does. It becomes good to us when we approach it in a particular way. It becomes evil to us when we approach it in a different way. And maybe a good example of this is our relationship, our love-hate relationship with bacteria. Bacteria, are they good or evil?
Depends.
It depends. Exactly right. Right? Because if it's a bacteria that I've got and it's infecting my lungs and, and it's giving me pneumonia and whatever, then I'm in a bad relationship with it. If it's a bacteria that lives in my gut, in my bowels, and helps me to digest my food, and apparently people are discovering now that it has a big effect on mood, like, some component of depression and stuff like that may be related to gut bacteria balance and things like that. So there's this intimate synergy going on between me and bacteria all the time. In fact, if I killed all the bacteria in my bowel, I would probably die. Right? So I need the bacteria and the bacteria need me, and we get along really well together.
I'm glad to hear.
Yeah, well, most of the time, occasionally we have a tiff. And that's the difference, right? So and then, you might think of things like natural disasters. Things like earthquakes kill a lot of people, floods kill a lot of people. But you know what? They never did for the indigenous people of Australia before the Europeans came. When an earthquake happened, the ground shook a bit. So what? They didn't build huge skyscrapers that could come crashing down on them. They lived in harmony with the world around them. They respected in many tribes, they would kind of thank and ask the forgiveness of the animal that they killed so that they could eat it, right? And because they lived in this harmony, nature was more like the bacteria, right? It's a very harmonious, friendly sort of situation. We take for granted now our civilized way of life and buildings and cars, and I don't think we could live any other way. But a lot of our problems, natural disasters, are because of the way we've chosen to live. It's not really nature's fault. That's probably the best response I think that I've come up with so far, and I'm still searching.
Oh, that's good.
How about the idea of suffering in terms of God wants us to feel some sort of suffering so we can become closer to Him?
Right. Okay. Yeah, we have to treat this one with care. One of the things that I try to stress with people is that God does not want you to suffer. Because sometimes people will say that, I don't know, they got a disease or something, they say, oh, God is teaching me a lesson. And I don't think that's fair, right? Because James tells us God himself never does evil. He's not the author of evil. When evil happens, it's always because a human being did it, or it's because we're out of harmony with nature, or whatever it might be. That's not what God does. God allows the evil to happen, but then his role is to want to turn that evil into a good. So it's not like a parent who, says, I'm going to give you 100 sums so you can learn how to do multiplication tables. And the child is saying, oh, no, I don't want to do it. And, and they hate doing it and they suffer through it and they cry and all that. It's not like that at all. It's much more that we live in a world where these things happen for all the things we talked about earlier. And when we suffer, God shares our suffering with us. When we are sad, he weeps with us, right? That's very different to, the teacher who's standing there for, sternly saying, do your sums. That's not what it's like. He's actually down there at the desk weeping with us at this horrible teacher. And that's what the cross is as well. It's Jesus suffering with all of humanity, carrying the suffering of all humanity on the cross. But nailing it to the cross and then raising it into the glory of the resurrection. So yeah, is God teaching me a lesson? Well, the world is full of lessons, let's put it that way. If you want to say God made a world where such bad things can happen, yeah, because of free will and all that sort of stuff, he did. And that's one of the reasons possibly why that contributed to why the world should be the way that it is, because we do grow through those difficult periods. There's no doubt about it. But the thing I want to avoid is this picture of God kind of saying, how am I going to make Chris suffer today so that he can learn a lesson,
Can I challenge that thought for a second?
Yes.
In the Bible, it talks about God putting his people through the furnace to purify them like gold.
Yes.
So it sounds very intentional. I'm going to put you in the furnace of fire.
Yeah.
So you can be better.
Yeah. But we have to understand how language works. And this is going to lead us into a rabbit hole of how to interpret the Bible as well. I don't know if you want to go there or not.
Do whatever you like.
It takes us.
This is your time.
I think, again, one of the things that's important that the church fathers teach us about how to look at the Bible is that the Bible is a human-divine synergy. It's a cooperation between real living people and the Holy Spirit that inspires them. So the eternal truths that are in the Bible are inspired by the Holy Spirit, but they are embodied in a human frame. Just like Jesus is the divine logos of God, but he took on a limited human body. And so the logos of God, that's scripture, that's in the Bible is the same kind of thing. So when people are writing things in the Bible, they're not writing them from a God's eye view. They're writing them from their own point of view. And therefore, there are some authors of books in the Bible whose grammar is not the best, right? They would not have got an A in school. And the Holy Spirit doesn't magically make their grammar perfect and poetic and beautiful, right? Because that's who they are. There are people who wrote things in the Bible who went through horrible things and they felt that it was God being angry with them. So how do you think they're going to express it? They're going to express it in that language, right? The Psalms are full of that. Lord, how long will you be angry with us? But does God get angry? I mean, very few Christians would say that God actually experiences human anger, right? I mean, human anger is actually, it's a bodily thing as much as it is an emotional thing. You probably know this, like if you're given beta blockers or something that stops your heart rate from racing and your blood pressure from rising, it's actually really hard to get angry because your body, your body's not doing what it should. So your emotions also don't do it, right? Can we say that about God? Can we say God has a blood pressure and a heart rate and adrenaline? And we can't say that. We're using human language, human concepts to describe a situation that happens in real time, but it's from the perspective of the author. And the church fathers weren't that interested in those kinds of details. What they were looking for was the deeper, or they would say the higher levels of the interpretation.
So you're saying when Jesus was angry and flipped the tables,
yes,
that was their interpretation of what Jesus was doing?
No, but in that case, it's different, right? Because that's the incarnate God.
Okay.
He really is a human being,
Yeah.
and he's behaving as a human being. So in those, he probably was angry. I think.
Yeah. I just have a question. So if we take a step back, in terms of the suffering, often, let me put my atheist hat on.
You didn't take your Calvinist.
Yeah, sorry. Often what an atheist would say is that what we're doing is we're giving reason to our suffering and we're framing it in a way that it is now good.
Yeah.
It's like this is something that's evil and you're just trying to find the silver lining through all these things.
Yeah.
One thing that I noticed, I did like a small pre-talk on, I was doing like God is love, God is truth, God is the way, the truth, the life, like all these like capitals. And I came up to God is good. And when I was looking through the Bible, there's no capital G when it was like talking about God is good, like good in essence. And then I kind of went into a rabbit hole of what is good and bad, what is good and evil. And then I kept on going and I thought about it, and it's true. When we say something's good, it's our perception of that thing being good. And that, like, say I hit Chris, right? For Chris, that's bad, but for me, that's good. So it can't be I'd love to. No, I'm joking. For me, it's good because it's my perception of what it is. How do we sort of reconcile with our version of good and bad? And often I hear that there's no such thing as bad. It's just the absence of good.
Right.
The same way there's no such thing as dark. It's just the absence of light.
Yeah.
How do we, understand what good with a kind of capital G is without any sort of precursors or perception getting in the way?
Yeah. Well, look, I think it's very perceptive of you to realize that good and evil are relative terms. And there's no avoiding that, right? Good is always good for someone, and evil is always evil for someone. And as you say, the same thing may be good for X, but evil for Y.
Yeah.
Right? So here's the interesting thing, though. In moral philosophy, right, secular philosophers, not necessarily Christians, by and large, the prevailing view at the moment is that there is such a thing as an objective evil and good. How can that be? And as far as I've been able to tell, and it's not for a lack of trying, I've tried to talk to lots of people who disagree with me about this and understand it. As far as I can tell, they just have to accept that as an unprovable axiom, right? So we just see that in the world there are certain things that we say are objectively evil, like, killing an innocent child, for example, for no good reason, right? Yes, objectively an evil thing. Why should it be objectively evil? We just accept it. It has to be like that. The Christian can say, actually, we have a way to explain that. And that is good, like the capital G good, is what is good for God. Right? Because if God is the creator of the whole world, then everything in the world has to be taken morally in relation to him. We would even go further than that and say that what is good is what is according to the nature of God. So it's not like God could, wake up tomorrow and say, oh, you know what, I've decided atomic bombs are a good thing and, nuclear war is a good thing. Yeah. Like, I've changed my mind, right? The Greek gods could do that because they were very fickle. Zeus probably did that half a dozen times a day. But our God, no, it's his nature is what is real. And this comes back to this idea of the good is what is real and exists, and evil is just when you take that away or you distort it or you twist it. And that gives us what is both an objective and a subjective good at the same time. It's objectively good for all of us. It doesn't matter what you or I think about it. There are things that are good and evil, but it's only good and evil because it is good and evil in relation to the nature of God. If it's the reality, if it reflects the nature of God, that's what we call good. If it doesn't, that's what we call evil. Yeah,
that's so powerful. And I think even in the creation story, as God is saying, he's saying he created the birds and the seas and it was good.
Yeah.
And I think that something that was powerful for me is that I noticed this, that in creation, everything is so ordered that it fulfills its purpose.
Yeah.
So a tree can't stop being a tree and giving off carbon dioxide. River can't stop giving off being a river and fertilizing the plants around it, and it's all in harmony, it's all in unison. And it's interesting that as humans, he stops and says, very good. And we are the very ones that, one, are created in his image, but two, distort from our purpose, and we go away from our purpose. And who else is actually, and in Christ we can see that is us as creation. That is us in our, if we were to fulfill our purpose the same way a tree does, the same way a bird flies, same way. Yeah.
Wow, that's really interesting. I never made that connection before, actually. Wow. But maybe the very good is because we can, like, our goodness is a chosen goodness. It's a voluntary goodness, whereas for the others, it's not.
Exactly.
I never thought of that before. Wow. That's really cool.
PhD in philosophy.
If only it was that easy.
Well, I feel like the question of suffering isn't answered, because when someone comes to me and says, I do not believe in God because this happened, how, like, I'm in so much pain and I just don't believe in God because there's so much pain, what would you say to that person?
Yeah, so this is, I suppose, another of those levels at which we can pose the question. And they call this sometimes the existential problem of evil or the emotional problem of evil. And I think you've described it beautifully, because it's not really a logical problem. I'm hurt. It's a very personal problem. And when a person is hurt, I mean, we think of faith and belief nowadays as being like, here is a sentence that someone writes and I can put a tick next to that. I believe in that. But for most of Christian history, belief actually was not propositional like that. It was relational. It was about trust. So to believe in God didn't mean I can recite the creed and I accept all the sentences in it. It meant I trust the God that's described in that creed. And what you've just described seems to be a betrayal of that trust. And that's why I think it very naturally turns into disbelief when we understand belief as trust. How do you deal with that? It's probably the hardest level at which to deal with this problem. I mean, I think it's hard for everyone because it does go very deep into the very heart of a person. I find it very hard because I don't really understand emotions that well. Unfortunately, God just didn't give me that gift.
Yeah, me too.
And I think, look, the best answer I can give you is if someone says that to me, I just need to show them love. The response is not an argument, it's a hug. the best I can do is to try, insofar as I'm able, to be the presence of the loving God for them in my very frail and limited human form. And just as they felt hurt by God in whatever experience they've gone through, all I can offer is the kindness and the goodness of God by loving them, by accepting them, not being upset that they're saying horrible things about my God and my faith and taking offense and lashing back, just letting all that flow and showing love.
Where does that take us? If that's our role?
Yeah.
Do you think that transforms the person? And do you think that's the best way to do it?
Look, I think it's the only thing that has any chance of helping that person to heal from that wound. I don't think arguments are ever going to do that. I don't think it works all the time by any means. And I mean, we are very frail and limited human beings, and we are very limited in what we can do, even in the love that we can offer. If we're honest about it, we can only give as much as we have. And ultimately, though, I don't feel that we should feel horrible about that either. I mean, it is sad. Leave aside, I'm really not talking about, it's terrible that one of our Christian tribe has left the tribe and, joined another tribe. I'm not at all talking about that. I'm simply talking about someone who, because of their experiences, has been cut off from the source of life and the source of joy and the source of peace, who is God, who is Christ. And that is a very sad thing. But I also don't think that I'm meant to save the whole world. I think that was Jesus's job. It's not my job. My job is just to do whatever little bits he gives me here and there. And the results are not my responsibility. The results are in God's hands. It's not human beings who change hearts. It's the Holy Spirit working with a receptive heart. That's the only thing that changes hearts.
I think in our previous episode, it's a very big testament to that. So like Debbie and Abba, they would be giving us stories upon stories of people who were in tragedy, and probably saying the same thing and had those same questions that you were saying earlier, Chris. But it's the response to that tragedy which kind of shed a new light. Like even Abba was telling us about his story and was very sentimental, and it kind of goes to show the before and after, and that his tragedy after the fact was framed as the greatest thing ever. And that's like, it's kind of how we talk about Good Friday. That's why it's so good, because that tragedy was the point of all, like the point of resurrection. Like because of this tragedy, if this tragedy didn't happen, we would not have our sins forgiven. And I think that that's one of my, there's heaps of things, my favorite thing about Christianity, but in the Bible, it does not shy away from that at all. Yeah. It's actually in pretty much every story, a tragedy, a time where Joseph was in the well and said those things that you were saying, Chris. There was a time where Job was saying that. There was a time where Ruth was saying that. There was a time where insert every single character was in that situation where it was tragedy, it was despair, it was, God, why have you forsaken me? Why have you left me? Even with Jesus himself. And it doesn't shy away from that. It just goes to show that our God's a relatable God who understands where we are in those very, very dark times. And I guess the problem is that often we don't think about that when we're in the dark time. But yeah, one of the things that I always think about, especially in Passion Week, is that I always think about how the disciples felt just after Christ died. In those 3 days, that 3-day period before the resurrection, I think like, wow, the disciples would have felt the worst. Like the person that they've been following for 3 years and have been in footstep and proclaimed to be God, like they would have been in utter despair and utter agony. But that was literally the point where Christ was in Hades, fighting for their sins and the sins of the world. So it's such an important distinction, because the same thing happens with us. It's like we think God is the furthest away from us in the very, very moment where he's doing the work. He's doing it for us. So yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's the footprints principle, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know that poem.
In the sand. Yeah.
In terms of God and suffering, I have one more question for this part.
Sure.
can you explain to me the soul making theodicy?
Right. You are getting me back, aren't you? This is what I did in the sessions.
Yeah.
So look, it goes back to Irenaeus, the church father, but has been taken up by a few people in history. And these days, a guy called John Hick, a philosopher, has sort of expressed it in modern terms. And it's basically, so a theodicy is a way of showing that God, contrary to appearance, is still righteous, right? It may look like he's being unfair and doing bad things, but if you think about it and look at it deeply enough, you'll see that what he's doing actually is the best thing. And the reason in this case is that kind of what you guys have been saying. God uses the evil that happens in the world to mold us into the more perfect beings that we were meant to become. And I think it's actually in many ways, I mean, there are problems with it, but in many ways, it is a very persuasive way to look at things. Because again, like if you imagine a world in which there is no evil, right? So nothing evil ever happens, then you also have to give up on things like courage, because nobody will ever be afraid and have to overcome their fear. You have to give up on generosity, because everyone will always have everything they want. Nobody will ever need anything from anyone. You have to give up on forgiveness, because nobody will ever hurt anybody else. You have to give up on nobility, right? Because there'd be nothing to be noble about. So, like, it'd be a very bland and empty world.
I think once you said there'll be no Superman.
Yeah.
There'll be no Spider-Man.
Imagine.
Because they don't need there's no evil. So there's no need for Spider-Man.
That is like a horrible nightmare, a world without DC and Marvel. Like, or Lord of the Rings, right? Or Narnia. I mean, that'd be horrible.
But isn't that what heaven would be? Like, heaven has no evil. It would have no, there would be no courage. There would be none of all of these things because, there's no sin. What are your takes on that?
Yeah, look, well, I think the difference between heaven and here is that we kind of know a bit about here. We know nothing about heaven. So that's always my preliminary answer to questions about heaven and hell. Honestly, we don't know. Okay? We have some hints here and there, but we really don't know. But I think the argument that you could make is that it will be different in that you mold the soul here on the earth through your free choices, working together with the grace of God in the world. And then you take that soul that you've molded with you into heaven. So in other words, the hard work's been done in this life, and then you get to enjoy the fruits of that hard work. You don't need the evil anymore because you've already become that, perfected image of God. If God had just created heaven without the stuff we go through this world, you couldn't have that, right? Because there'd be no opportunity for you to make those choices and go through those experiences.
I have a weird question. I'll put my atheist hat back on.
You never took it off, did you?
Sorry, whoops. So I think when speaking to my atheist friends, what I'll kind of understand about their sort of understanding of or their kind of viewpoint when it comes to like morality and all these things is that, one, like Christians are using their faith, which like power to them, they'll say, to deal with suffering. Like it's like just their tool to deal with suffering. And it's not about Christianity being true or false. It's just like they're using it as their way to sort of escape from their problems, and they're giving themselves reasons to why they're suffering, and they can kind of handle the suffering better when you kind of just give yourself reasons to it. And then me as an atheist, the way I see it is that yes, the world's full of suffering, but I'm just going to create like a hierarchy of values based on how I'm going to avoid suffering. So I might go to the gym and I might work out to suffer a little bit, but it's just avoiding the suffering in the future. Oh, I might get a job because I just don't want to starve. So I need to get this job so that I can feed. And I want something to love. So let me get a wife. I want, I don't know what the next progression is. Maybe let's get children to avoid the suffering of my wife bickering about wanting children. Things like this. It's like the hierarchy of how to avoid suffering. Like everything's about how to avoid suffering.
Yeah.
What's the Christian perspective, and why do we, I guess, embrace suffering?
Yeah, look, I don't. Yeah, embrace is too strong a
Too
word,
strong?
I think.
Sure.
And look, I mean, you're not wrong. I think in history, Christians have kind of really embraced it. I think of, I don't know, the medieval Catholic orders who used to flog themselves and things like that. But that's wrong.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I think that's just bad. We don't. Suffering is evil, and we have to call a spade, right? I know, like, we call it, well, it's a Western term, Good Friday. In Arabic, it's al-Gom al-Azima, which is the Great Friday.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's but it's not great as in great.
Yeah.
It's like great as in important, right? Because we look at the cross and we say, that's evil. What happened on the cross is evil. There's no doubt about it. Right, we're not shying away from that.
Yeah.
But God turns it into a greater good. But anyway, that's not the question you're asking. So I think there's a useful distinction that helps here, and that is the difference between meaning in life and the meaning of life.
Yeah.
Chris will remember this, I'm sure. Should I ask you to explain it?
I'll need my notes.
This was the one I was listening to.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I remember. Yeah. I was
The one that you said you fell asleep on?
Yeah. No, I was listening to it and I was enthralled for an extended period of time. But like at night, I was like, wow, I'm very tired.
Yeah.
This is. Oh,
What
sorry.
was it about?
Meaning in life. Please explain.
And look, let me say, by the way, that I actually have a great deal of admiration for the atheist who still lives a good and moral life, because they don't have the advantages that we do, the motivations that we do to do what is right, and yet they still choose to do what is right.
100%.
And I really admire that. I think that's incredible.
Yeah.
But yeah, the difference is basically like a meaning of life is something transcendental, something bigger than yourself, right? For the Christian, it would be, what God teaches us about what is a good life and how to live and all those sorts of things. And when we fulfill those things, when we love one another, when we make the world better than we left it, when we leave the world better than when we leave the world in a better state than it was when we arrived, and, stuff like that, right? That gives us purpose in life. Meaning in life is not objective, not transcendental, not bigger than yourself. It's just a choice that you make. You set yourself a goal, and when you achieve that goal, you get a sense of achievement. It goes anywhere from, I'm going to beat this video game, which, like, who cares? But for me, it becomes really important, right? And you can tell because I'm so motivated and focused on doing it, to, I want to be president, I want to get married, I want to have a McMansion, whatever it might be, right? So that's kind of the difference. And everybody, Christians, atheists, everybody creates this meaning in life. We set goals for ourselves. Sometimes it's us, sometimes it's society around us that teaches us to set those goals. And really, you can tell it's that category because you could do something completely different and your life would still be just as good.
Yeah.
Right? If you didn't live in a McMansion, you could still have just as happy a life and so on. But if you were Adolf Hitler instead of Mother Teresa, that seems to make a big difference now. So that belongs in the category of the meaning of life. So are we just making stuff up to make ourselves feel good? From the atheistic point of view, I can see that it would look like that. But I would also have to ask, does it work? And I think implicit in your atheistic question was that it actually works for you guys, but the problem is it's not true.
Yeah.
Right? It's not real. It's just a fantasy. But I don't know. Doesn't the fact that it works make it more likely to be real and true. I mean, it's not a certainty. It doesn't make it necessary that it's true. There are illusions that work, placebo effects and stuff like that. But generally, if something works, the reason is because it fits with reality.
Yeah.
That would.
Yeah, nice. I have a question about heaven and hell.
We know nothing about it.
But your question answered.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any
I
further
mean, it depends. Is it answered?
Is it answered for your liking?
Yeah, I'd say so.
Did you find meaning in life?
Well, yeah.
Does that make sense? Did I use it in the correct? You did. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, like everything's tied to purpose. Like I'm not gonna get up and eat unless I'm hungry. Well, I mean, depends, but yeah, it's always but yeah, it's always tied to purpose. But yeah, it's a strange topic, but just because I even something that I really like about Jordan Peterson is that he really connects the truth of the Bible in a totally different way. Like it's like the psychological aspect of it, and then you can see that there's further meaning in just the historical accounts. And obviously, as Orthodox, we believe in like the symbolism of everything. But even like one of the stories was in Exodus with the staff, and he brought up the staff when there was the plague of the snakes, and he said, look at this staff, and then once you look at it, all the snakes will go away. And that's what John Peterson was saying, was that's indicative of the concept of face your fears. And the only way to overcome your fears is to face it voluntarily. And it's like, this is a concept that is like used in psychology for how long now? And it can kind of date back to as early as Exodus. And that's one of the things that I love, especially when it comes to Christianity. No one will ever tell you to stop looking and stop searching and stop being inquisitive and stop asking questions. The more questions you ask, the closer you'll get to truth. That's what we believe. And that's...
Yeah, it's not what you always hear in churches, but okay, I do agree with you. It should be.
Yes. But yeah.
Nice. All right. Everyone goes to heaven. What do you think about that?
This is news.
Because, okay, hear me out.
I remember you telling me this once.
No. I don't actually believe it, because apparently it's very bad to believe it. God is loving, okay? And if he kicks someone, let's say a father, he kicks someone out of his house, he'll do it out of love, not to really kick him out. It's like, if you do this again, you have to leave. Like, he's not really gonna, he doesn't mean it. Mean it. Do you think God means it when he says, if you do this, if you disobey, you go on to hell?
Yeah, I think he does, in the sense that a doctor would mean it when he says to you, if you keep smoking, you will get lung cancer. In exactly that sort of sense. And I think this is, again, very much the sort of Protestant Calvinist approach to heaven and hell puts the choice in God's hand, right? I mean, Calvinism is the extreme of that. God doesn't even let you have any say in the choice. He's the one who sends you to hell. I think the more ancient and patristic understanding of it is it's what they call an ontological view. It's about being, what our nature is. And it's the idea that when we sin, we corrupt our being. And when you corrupt it enough, it becomes your nature. So it's not that God, against your will, throws you into hell. By corrupting my nature so badly, I'm already in hell while I'm still alive on earth. And all that happens when I die is I get what I wanted, right? I chose the darkness. I chose evil. I chose selfishness. And God, in his love, does not take my free will away from me. He says, if this is what you want, I promised you could have what you want.
What if you're in hell and you change your mind?
Well, can you do that? We don't know. We haven't been there, right? I mean, is there even such a thing as time in heaven and hell? Or is time, space is part of this universe. And the physicists tell us that space and time are basically the same thing, right? 4-dimensional space-time. So if there's no space in heaven, will there be time? Will there be a different kind of space and time, something that's totally different to what we know? Am I confusing you? I hope I'm trying to.
That's the point.
Because I'm confused. Right. I don't know. I mean, if there's no time in heaven, how do you change your mind?
Yeah.
Right? If it's some kind of a abstract state of being, then maybe you are what you are, and that's how it remains. Or maybe there's stuff that's going to happen that we have no conception of. I don't know.
One thing I heard, someone gave a Bible study and he said God is love. So because God is love, every single time we disobey, love is, if you have infinite love, you'd also have infinite sadness. Because if you love someone so much and they go, you are so sad.
Right, yeah.
Right. So because God is love, how can we reconcile that God is love, allowing his children to burn?
Yeah. Yeah. It is a really difficult question, and one to which I must honestly answer, I don't know the answer. Look, all I will say is those who are interested in it, church fathers had different views about this, and some of them delved into it. Some of them got in trouble for delving too deeply into it. But all I can say with confidence and honesty is I don't know the answer.
That's a great response.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I always think of there's an icon of Christ knocking on the door and it doesn't have a door handle. I'll pop it up if I find it.
Yeah.
And it's so true. Like Christ is always there and he is knocking. But it's just a matter of if we open the door to him. And I guess if you, it's all in that. I mean, we've discussed it earlier, but it's all in about part of that free will. Like if he forces us to love him, then is that very loving at all? I wouldn't say so. But yeah.
Yeah, and Isaac the Syrian has a lovely speculation about this, that it's actually the love of God itself is the fire of hell that tortures people. And what he means by that is God is just himself, right? He can never be anything other than himself. He is love. But if I become the kind of person who hates being loved, who rejects being loved, then that love of God becomes painful to me. And it's not because God's punishing me. It's not because God's doing something, because he wants to hurt me, or he's just being who he is. It's just that I've made myself the kind of person for whom love is agony.
Yeah. That was a big question I had. I remember in one of the our Friday night talks, the speaker said that the world hated Christ. So if the world doesn't hate you, then you're not imitating Christ. And then I was thinking about it and I was like, it's kind of crazy to even think about if I'm constantly loving others, if I'm constantly being Christ-like to others, why on earth would someone hate me? If I was genuinely doing that,
Christ was hated.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. Christ was hated. Yeah.
But I'd want to qualify that, though. What do we mean by the world? Who is the world who is hating you? It's not all the vast majority of decent and good people who are out there, right? And I'm sure you have many people at work and, your neighbors and whatever who love you, right? Because they're good and decent people and they recognize good in you.
Yeah.
And a lot of people love Jesus, right? Who hated him? It was the people whose hearts were full of selfishness and evil. That's what we mean by the world hates me and the world. It's not the whole universe. It's the corrupted, fallen part of human souls that we're talking about.
Yeah. And even when I was thinking about it, I was like, I do the same. Like, I will tend to hate Christ-like behaviors in others, and I'll justify it for wrong means. Like, how often maybe we'll see someone do something at church, or we'll see someone do a great service, and we'll be like, oh, that person's doing that because they're trying to look good in front of this person who's doing this. And that's like, that really is, when I thought about it, that's me actually hating a Christ-like behavior. And it's because I'm putting an ulterior motive, I'm putting a story behind it, I'm framing it in a way.
Why are you doing that?
Exactly. That's something
No, it's a question. I'm asking you, why are you doing that? Let's have a confession on
why?
I'd say, if I was to do it, it's probably because I'm envious of maybe something that they're doing, or or like have to like kind of dirty it so that I don't look as far from it.
This is very interesting. And maybe one time for a podcast, we can do an open confession session. It's like a psychology.
Yeah. Let me see. That'd be quite vulnerable though.
We'll make things up.
But yeah.
Very creative.
You're gonna say something. Cut you off. Sorry.
No, I was just cringing at the idea of doing that.
You kind of like, you were saying, open confession.
May I say though, there were parts of the early church where that was the practice, that people confessed in front of the whole congregation. And I was blessed to attend a Vespers of the Indian Orthodox Church, where while they were singing hymns, Abuna sat right in front of the curtain, in front of the altar, on top of the choir, in one chair, and people were lined up, and they would come and sit next to him in front of the whole congregation and confess.
Oh my goodness.
But they were singing hymns, right? And Abuna was talking quietly with them, so you couldn't hear what they're saying. But I think that that's sort of a leftover thing from the days when people would confess in front of the whole church.
Wow. I have a question for you, Tim.
Yep.
Why do you feel like you're envious?
Whoa. No, I mean, I feel like I'm generally not, but I think at times when you kind of see someone doing something that you aspire and
aspire to be?
Well, like, yeah, it might be a virtuous thing that they have, or like if you see yourself a certain way and someone is up here to where you are, and that's like your goal to be up there, a way to feel like it's more achievable is to bring them down here. So it like shortens that distance, and you can do it in really conniving ways to sort of like justify those things. Like if someone's really successful in their business or whatever, something you'll hear people say is like, oh, but they're exploiting people for their whatever. And it's like, you don't know that. You're just making up rumors, but
and just to take a bit of the pressure off you.
Yeah.
I'd just like to remind us all that, this is in the context of, the problem of evil. And it's a really good illustration of how something that is perfectly good in itself can be turned into evil by the way that we relate to it because of the corruption in us. That's what makes it evil.
Yeah, for sure.
There's a few questions on Instagram, but I kind of want to put it all into one question. And I also was thinking about not my own theory, but something that's very interesting.
Chris Theodicy.
Chris Theodicy. That everything in life to be better is suffering. Because you're saying without hardships or challenges, you can't have patience, you can't have courage, you can't have faith, you can't have hope. We're challenged all the time. So without a challenge, there's a quote by me, I said this. You are, because I said it once and then someone's like, oh, that's pretty good. I was like, yeah, that's good.
So you coined it.
No, there was something, maybe someone else said it. So you are as much as you are challenged. So if you're not challenged, if you don't go through suffering, you become no one.
Yeah.
Like if you're not out of your comfort zone, because going out of your comfort zone is a form of suffering, and you only grow through suffering. If someone is talking and they're really annoying me, like extremely annoying me, and they're talking and talking and talking, right? No, I'm not saying it's you, but like you can sit down and be like, okay, I'm annoyed, but how can I have patience? Yeah. So I'm suffering, but how can I deal with it? How can I deal with it? Or it's something I don't really want to do. For example, there's a situation where I don't want to deal with it, but I have to go and deal with it. I'm now voluntarily suffering because it's a challenge to go. If I don't want to do something and I go do it, it's a form of suffering. And then we can relate it back to Christ, like the soul-making theodicy.
Yeah.
How the more I suffer, the more I'll try to look like Christ.
Yeah.
And the reason why I'm saying this is because there's a question here. It says, if I'm not suffering, just to one more point, sorry. Lots of people say they come to Christ because they've gone through something in their life and they turn to Christ through suffering. One of the questions here was, how can I turn to Christ when everything's easy going?
Right. Well, first of all, lucky you that everything's going well. I mean, how often does that happen?
Yeah.
I don't know that ever happens, really. I mean, it's good that they feel that way, but there's probably always some, kind of sacrifice, challenge, suffering that's going on. But look, I think in the overall scope of a human life, there is more than enough suffering to go around. I don't think anyone has a shortage of suffering. So if you are going through a good period where things are calm, I think that's the time to rejoice and to consolidate, right? And to seek that relationship with God. I mean, even if you're not beset by problems from the outside, we are always beset from the inside. Our vices, the bad ways of thinking,
envy,
the bad habits of thought that we have, the distractions that stop us from being able to focus on God. I mean, if you think of the monks and nuns, if you think of those who even went as far as being hermits, they basically removed all the sources of external suffering, right? And yet they still had huge battles internally. And their goal was not to become a hero or, whatever. Their goal was to purify the soul, to stop it from being distracted away from God, and to train it on how to be focused on the presence of God, which is always there, right? In Him we live and move and have our being. But almost always we're just not thinking about it. We're not aware of it. We're not engaged with Him at all. If you have, if you're not sick or lost your job or whatever, and everything seems to be going smoothly, that's your chance. Come on, mate, get in there and work on yourself. Yeah. And believe me, sooner or later, they're going to come piling back again.
Yeah. Oh, something that I feel with suffering and spiritual life is that often you can be at this sort of level of spiritual life and suffering can happen, and because you're more thankful and more equipped to deal with it, it can be like this. And then when a period of suffering comes, yes, you slump, but it's not so bad because you're spiritually you're in prayer and you're constantly leaning on God, so you can kind of firm it. You can take it. You can take the hit. Whereas sometimes I've felt is that if I'm down here and in my spiritual life, and then some sort of suffering or something comes up, that it really hits me hard, and then I have to work my way up. So it's a way that God really sort of helps in that sense. And there was something that Peter Fahim, I know you watch. I actually mentioned him earlier. The Protestant pastor who came to Orthodoxy, he talks about this a lot. So often when we're in the furnace, as you were saying, it's described as silver. And actually, when it comes to silver, when it's in the furnace, you're in that furnace, you're in that fire, you're being forged. And actually, if you're in there for just a little bit too long, it turns into, I think, silver oxidize or something.
It destroys the silver.
It destroys it, yeah. And it turns brittle. And if you were to ask a silversmith, how do you know when it's done?
Sees the reflection.
Exactly. Sees the reflection. So it's similar to Christ. It's kind of saying that Christ puts us in the furnace, and just when He sees His reflection in us, He takes us out, and we're purified.
I'm learning all
that.
Kinds of cool things today.
Yeah. That's good. I hope they are. But yeah, that's something that I now think about.
Yeah. Look, I mean, we were talking about Superman before, right? And I think the real superpower of the Christian is that verse, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. which I'm constantly pointing out to people, does not mean I can get a 99.95 ATAR or become prime minister or CEO of my company. When you read the verses before it, do you remember what he actually says? He says, I have learned to be content in whatever state I am.
Mm-hmm.
I've learned how to be full and to be empty, how to be satisfied and hungry, elevated and exalted or brought low. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. What he's actually saying is nothing in this world has the power to take away my contentment, my peace.
And how can you truly be content in the worst cases, in suffering?
If you have Christ and Christ is the deepest desire of your soul, nothing else matters. I think it's really that simple. Simple to say, really hard to achieve.
Mm-hmm. How do you achieve it?
I'll tell you when I find out.
It's actually funny on the Salt podcast, our friends over at the Salt podcast, Father Elijah and Father Anthony were on the podcast, and they were talking about how the person who is richest is the person who wants the least. It's not about how much wealth you have, because you can have all the wealth in the world but want so much more and you don't feel rich at all.
Yeah.
But you can have not very much and not want any more and you feel as rich as can be. So it's like the way to be rich is to want less.
I've heard it put in this way, that the richest people are not those who have what they want, but the people who want what they have.
Yes, exactly. That's right. Yeah. That's good.
If you were to leave a question for the next guest, and to be honest, I don't know who the next guest is.
That makes it hard.
But I could guess, and I don't want to say it just in case, but let's make a prophecy.
I won't tell anyone.
It's on camera. Look, probably maybe Father Anthony from Liverpool, and his wife.
Right. Oh, lovely. Yeah.
About dating.
Oh.
Okay. So you can either ask it specifically about dating or specifically to Father Anthony, up to you.
Yeah, it can be a general question.
What would you ask?
Oh. How evil should I be?
Just throw him in the deep end.
Yeah, why not be evil, So he can ask the same questions. Why does God allow evil?
No, look, I suppose my question would be, okay, I'm actually curious to know the answer to this. I've noticed recently there is a phenomenon, particularly among young men, to kind of be scared of commitment. I'd love to know if he has noticed that, and if he has, what does he think is the reason behind it?
Very interesting.
Chris, what do you reckon? Chris, do you feel this personally?
No. Do you have a theory?
No, that's a good question.
I honestly don't understand it. I don't know why. I've just, and it's not everyone.
Yeah.
But I have noticed a pattern of a certain kind of young man who seems ready, and finds a wonderful girl and they're really suitable for each other, but they're just scared. Is it fear? Is it waiting for something better? I mean, I don't understand what it is. It's a genuine question. It's
Very
not a...
No.
Well, we'll find out next time.
On the Parable Podcast.
I look forward to it.
Thanks a lot, Abuna.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. It's been a pleasure. It's been one of the best conversations I've had of this kind. So thank you very much.
Your whole life. Thank you so much.
I think that's the best compliment you can get, is when the guest says, I enjoyed my time.
Yeah.
It happened 2 or 3 times, and I think as soon as they say that, that's it. Doesn't matter what happens after.
Whatever.
Even if it doesn't capture.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Abuna.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Oh, good.
Appreciate it. So, Abuna, what do you really think about the commitment question?
I honestly don't know.